It gonna get you. Recording started. It's only 29 after. I'm sorry, I don't have any coins. I'm sorry, I'm all out of coins. I'd bring you up, but there's no point if I don't have any coins. All right, let's go. I hope you're okay, Joe. Hope everything's okay. I hope you're not upsetting me. Collective repression and illegal crimes. At the same time, we're begun the execution of patriots who had been sentenced to death. Every day in Algiers, Oran, and Constantine, the colonialists would guillotine 2 or 3 Algerian combatants.
Is bad.
Death and execute them does not merely express the French scorn for the rules of war. This decision manifests quite to the contrary, a deliberate will to strike the patriots in his or her dignity by contesting the patriots' quality as combatants, by arraigning them before the law courts and sending them to the guillotines like vulgar assassins. The enemy strives to ignore the cause, trivialize the combat, and pour scorn on soldiers. The territorial armies in the Masu tactic. As July 1959 came around, the balance sheet of the French forces was manifestly negative. Mr. Lacoste pushed and pulled from all sides, and feeling the game to be slipping away from him, entrusting his powers to the military, behind which brazenly the racist colons of Algeria were amalgamated. Facing an imminent catastrophe, fully aware of the deteriorating situation, cognizant of the extent and depths of the FLN's influence, the military staff decided to react with a bang. The officials instructed every Muslim is a rebel. Took over from that of the first years, every Muslim is a suspect. Adding the finishing touches, Mr. Lacoste armed close to 80,000 colonials and in Algeria for the aim of total surface control. It was these territorial units made up a congenially racist and fundamentally immoral men who feared the revolutionary movement and were first in fix a quasi-genocidal character of the repression. Onward from July to August 1956, these men adopted the habit of busting into the dowers and preventively slaughtering dozens of Algerians and sadistically raping Algerian young girls and women and plundering the people's goods. These men, emboldened by the passivity of the civilian authorities, egged on the French military. Impressed by the efficacy of this method, General Masu used it as an essential plank for his plan. Algerian under torture. The famous Battle of Algiers took place in this period of deliberate assassinations. By the truckload, Algerians were arrested in the streets and on building sites, driven to sentries somewhere, and ignominiously interrogated. For more than 8 months, the French colonialists, with a pipe in the left hand and a magneto in the right, interrogated Algeria. Prohibited zones were decreed, and entire regions served. By the thousand, Algerian civilians lived on the confines fled. The deluged. Let me make sure I got this word right. I don't have any coins, everybody. I'm out of coins. No coins. No coins. Deluge of fire and iron, and took refuge in Tanzania and in Morocco. Now it was not simply humanity that was being attacked and slaughtered, but the country as a whole, including its flora and fauna. It was a physical countryside with its mountains and its forests that were targeted and tortured. The magnitude of this phase did not leave international opinions indifferent. Condemnations arose from everywhere, and even within the enemy's own ranks, disgust and horror set in. More and more unbelievable relations surfaced, and the president of the French Council was obliged to appoint a naturally spineless and ineffective safety committee. The balance sheet of this period was literally atrocious for the Algerian people. Several tens of thousands dead, hundreds of thousands of people displaced, entire regions destroyed. At the end of this period, Mr. Lacoste deemed himself entitled to announce the imminent end of the Algerian War. And indeed, the military and civilians, Frenchmen, buoyed by the champion of collective in which homicidal outbursts aimed essentially at exhausting the revolutionary upsurge, who discerned upon request signs heralding the collapse of the national forces. I have to appeal. Yay, look at me. Sorry, buddy. I don't have any coins, everybody. In hindsight, it can be said today that the fall of the mullet government, the short-lived appearance of the Bourgeois Manorio, or Gillard, or Pilfeminel governments, and now goalist ambiguities have their main causes in this expected, announced, and internally reported defect. Hold on a second. Oh, he's not even over there. I thought he was over there doing something. Oh, he's over there. Okay. French colonialism outside the law. During these 4 years of war, French colonialism in Algeria has operated irremediably outside the law. It has now detested from perpetrating any act at all, no matter how horrible. No ignominy has frightened it. With perversion, it has engaged in all undertaking that, for its full completion, has demanded scorn from humanity in its spirit, scorn from humanity in its flesh, and scorn from humanity in its soul. As foreign observers have been repeating for months, French colonialism in Algeria is the greatest shame of the Western humanity. After these various attempts to break the momentum of the Algerian people's liberation, the war criminals came to have 150,000 Algerians in prison and camps, close to 500,000 refugees, 600,000 dead. Proportionately, the misery and the suffering inflicted upon the Algerian people by French colonial barbarism has exceeded in intensity and magnitude those of the countries whose ravaged by the Second World War, and the struggle continues. The war crimes continue. Currently, the French government is ordering operations of scope over the whole of the national territory. In Orana, for the 10 French generals are leading a battle that has taken on unexpected dimensions, even to the minds of the observers. Those on the international scene who had supposed that de Gaulle would usher in a policy of peace, today face from facts that go by the names of intensification of armed operation, exasperation of methods of repression and torture, and the extension of internment measures. General de Gaulle seems to have adopted his predecessors' blind and ineffective policies as his own, and given the bloodthirsty gains that for thank you, I'm glad the pill didn't go through. Bloodthirsty gangs that for 4 years have been plunged Algeria into mourning, a total freedom of action. The recent scandal of Pedro priests in Lyon has awakened public opinion, which had been euphoric and confident since General de Gaulle's reassurances that the hour of torture was over. Cardinal Guillaume, Archbishop of Lyon and Primate of the Gauls, most forthrightly caused the French police of criminal behavior. He said Muslim suspects are made to subscribe to declarations of misleading characters as easy to discern. To achieve this, there has been no shrinking from the use of violence in the mainstream most prejudicial of human dignity. It does not rest with me to give the painful and troubling details that I've made aware of. A serious inquest will be able to shed light on. I believe I am right to assert that some of those who have suffered these treatments have been placed in a serious moral and physical state. Thus, after any ambiguous period during which a disconcerted and anxious colonialism seemed to hint at retreating, now French military forces have resumed the offensive, restoring repression and torture. The Algerian people were straining towards the reconquest of its sovereignty, now that the road is still long and hard, as the enemy is abnormally ferocious. But it knows that the dawn of peace and victory will rise sooner or later. 17. The rise of anti-imperialist movement and the slow wit of pacification. El Mujahideen, number 34, 24th December 1958. Since 1st November 1954, the date that the National Democratic Revolution was sparked, the physiognomy of Africa and Asia has continued to undergo the most profound and most spectacular modification, overturning at vertiginous speed an old global balance fashioned by the imperialist states of Europe during over the century of hegemony and domination. A new world. In the space of 4 years, many events have occurred, some more important than others, but all expressed with a distinct clarity of vividness hitherto unknown. The tremendous progress of the universal anti-imperialist revolution. In Asia, young and newly independent states, such as Indonesia, have been seen consolidating the basis of their rediscovered sovereignty and victoriously resisting the treats of the imperialists ill-resigned to defeat. The people of the Republic of China, in its 5th year in 1954, has taken the gigantic step, so well known. The Chinese people, the China of the people's communes, and the Great Leap Forward has forever replaced the old underdeveloped nation, subject to the regime of foreign exploitation and unequal treaties. In the Middle East, the Arab people have engaged in no less decisive phases of its emancipation. The feudal world, which has been conserved after the fashion under the protection of imperialism, is definitely collapsing. Egypt is sweeping away in the vestiges of the foreign occupation and liberating the Suez Canal. Economic and social life there have been given renewed impetus. Building sites are popping up everywhere. Factories, and especially steelworks, are too. Unemployment is falling and misery with it. Corruption and illiteracy too, whilst education is developing and culture progressing amongst the broad masses, whilst their social awareness is increasing. Feudal and semi-colonial Iraq is shaking off the chains of past, and the Iraqi people, mature under the weight of oppression, affirmed its desires to progress and its vocation for freedom and independence in its historic revolution of last 14th July. Other Arab countries are escaping more and more from the wake of the imperialist state. We see Syria unite with Egypt to build an RAU and General Club Pacha, who is the Orient symbolized in an entire era quite a man under popular pressure. Asia and the Middle East are no longer the same as they were 4 years ago. During this lapse of time, they have caught up several decades. The revolution shows clearly the tremendous renewal underway amongst the greater part of the world, which is openly contributing to humanity's regeneration and its endless progress. Africa, it's emerging. The same truth prevails over the whole of the African continent. At once the Earth's youngest and most disadvantaged, the African peoples in a painful and heroic effort are standing upright and have decided at all costs to take back their stolen personalities, to affirm their humiliated dignity, to wrest back their status as free peoples, to turn, however, the hideous pages of slavery and servitude. Since November 1954, in the Saharan North and South, new independencies have followed on another, those of Morocco and Tanzania, which along with Algeria ought to be comprised of the Maghrebian Federation, and those of Ghana, just recently, and Guinea, which have resolved to join their futures within the framework of a federal union that would redouble their forces and increase their efficiency. The big African states of the center, Nigeria, with its 40 million inhabitants, will be totally independent in 1960. Similarly, for other territories such as Sierra Leone, Cameroon, etc., which accessions to independence is scheduled for the same date. Even Kenya and the distance of the wealthy Congo, both of which endure an iron regime of the British and the Belgians, are seeing and stirring prospects of freedom and national sovereignty open up ahead of them. Insistent talks already abounds about the imminent liberation of the great African leaders, Jomo Kayentian. French domination itself is retreating, forced to back down. It has been obliged to become more liberal, loosen its grips, and make, with good or bad grace, substantial concessions, and territorial assemblies of the Tom oversee territories, and are transforming into legislative assemblies, one after the other. The states are emerging in Madagascar and Senegal, in Mauritania, and in Chad, restrained by the straitjacket of the community. These states will end up by breaking their tethers sooner or later, certainly sooner than French specialists on Africa are wont to believe. From being paralytic and armless states headed by puppets, they will become free states that will integrate into their genuine communities, the grandiose African communities that is currently on full gestation. The Bandung Accra axis. The awakening of the Asian and African masses is not idle talk. Its effects translate into concrete achievements that the colonialists no longer have it in their power to ignore. The movement that set out from Bandung in April 1955 knows no stopping. Its all-powerful waves are sweeping away one after the other, the most deeply rooted imperialist strongholds, the growing number of days and weeks of solidarity, as well as those that were organized in supporting of Algeria, and the burgeoning of culture congresses like that in Tashkent, or economic ones modeled on that which recently brought its work to the close in Cairo, all attest to the validity of the Afro-Asian idea and the rise of the anti-imperialist movements. The day following China's liberation in 1949, Mao Zedong solemnly declared at the consultative conference that all the national organizations, we can state today that the quarter of humanity is on its feet. In his turn, Nkrumah announced in front of the representatives of 200 million Africans only a few days ago, all of Africa will be free in our lifetimes since this half of the 20th century is Africa's. This decade is the decade of African independence. Thus, the movement of national liberation is affirmed as a characteristic of our era. It is shaping contemporary history, just as imperialist expansion shaped the history of the last century. The Algerian Revolution has time on its side. When we say that the struggle of African people will inevitably be victorious, we don't mean that some mysterious fatality is sovereignly and mechanically driven the movement of history. We only want to set our revolution in its historical context and underline the deep complications and complex correlations existing between our struggle and the various other liberation movements, which, as we saw above, have been persistently victorious for 4 years.
And
it is ever lit with the contagious flame of the anti-imperialist revolution. Thus is revealed the tragically absurd face of the excessive effort that France is expending to finally be done with our struggle. The rising tide of history cannot simply be dissipated by covering the country with armored vehicles, tanks, and soldiers, disregarding all evidence by directly combating a liberation movement of the calibre of the Algerian Revolution means reducing oneself to embodying the sad role of syphosis. Ooh, I don't know this word. I don't have any coins at all. Who's this? I feel sorry, I don't have any coins. I'm not gonna waste their time. Oh, it's a Greek thing. Okay, hold on. Sisyphus condemned to exhausting himself in unintelligent and vain efforts. In recent years, that pre-consul can come to Algiers and not sententiously prophesizing. Oh my gosh, what the heck? I got another restricted, everybody. Yay, look at me. I don't care. It's whatever. No one cares. Who cares? Does anybody care? I don't care. PROPHESIZED. Okay.
Prophesy.
Yeah, prophesied the imminent end of the war. After having made such waves about the pacification, whose hero we believed himself to be Lacoste, was ultimately its shameful victim. One recalls how on the eve of 13th May he had to slip out of Algiers on tippy toes. Salan himself has also just been forced to quit his post. The only laurel he takes with him is the ludicrous praise of the general president that he himself helped raise to power, and all he leaves as his heritage is a placatory statement that advocates method 2 years out of date. The army's role, declared General Salan in his final directives, consisted above all in pursuing the destruction of gangs, disabling the rebels' political administrative infrastructure, organizing the informing populations. The directives that it has received since the end of 1956 remain valid, and the former general representative further specifies it is essential to increase the number of associations, circles and meetings in which the French women and men of Algeria of all origins and of all conditions can together, buoyed by their unity, seek solutions to the problems presented. Through Algeria's development and its definitive ascension to the rank of a full-fledged French province, this policy timelessly endorsed for 4 years and nonetheless radically inoperative, General de Gaulle has consecrated in all its immobilism and obstinacy. The new messenger of integration, Mr. Del Vareria, who succeeded Salans, seems nonetheless to be vested with a new mission. His role is essentially supposed to be to prompt the Algerian economy in line with the promises made in de Gaulle's recent speech in Constantine. His concern as a specialist will involve both concrete and ambiguous projects. On the one hand, to establish a steel works at Bonn, and on the other, the imminent extraction of gas at Hassin Armel. Once carried out, such projects are supposed to create the economic basis necessary for social and political transformation that France wishes for. The Algerian population are supposedly enticed by these reforms, which allegedly guarantee them better conditions of existence. Some even came to see in them a reflex of national feelings that would be progressively supplanted by a sort of fury to live at any price, even in servitude. Whence Mr. Del Vareria devotes himself to capturing popular awareness by contriving the seduction of economic reforms. General Chalel shall have his hands free to continue destroying gains, since the essential goal of French policy ultimately resides there, destroying gains. All the rest is mere smoke and mirrors, and invasive action to gain time. The longer that the war in Algeria lasts, the more we obviously observe the following one, that the internal and external conditions of the revolution are becoming more and more favorable, correlatively to the growing successes of the burgeoning anti-imperialist movement. Two, that colonialism is increasingly losing its footing, accumulating errors and exacerbating its contradictions. Absolute divorce. Oh wait, I have to hit OK to my non-appeal. Isn't that awesome? General de Gaulle shows he is enthralled to May 13th when he declares that the page of the combats have been turned and decided to undertake the economic battle in Algeria that will lead to integration. Supposedly the political problem resolved. He then turns to grapple with the human problem. Under Guy Mollet's reign, leaders continued to insist on the war. First, hostilities had to stop, either through the ceasefire or through the crushing of the ALN. Economic and social reforms would then ensue. De Gaulle no longer bothers with that precondition, playing down the war and regulating regulate. Oh my gosh. Jesus Christ. There we go. Got it finally. Simple words. RELEGAT.
Relegating.
Yeah, relegating. That's why it's not reg. It's relegating it into the background. He has passed immediately to the phase of Algerian's construction. His policies would be justified at the pinch if the French military situation had improved from 2 years ago. As this is by no means the case, it looks like Lacoste pacification and in caricature. De Gaulle's does not rectify Guy Mollet. He presents no advance on him, and his innovated only in appearance. All he had done is to adopt the illusion of the SFIO's general secretary as his own by driving them into their last entrenchment. The immobilism of French policy can be characterized thus, increasing worse from 1 year to the next. French immobilism is especially pitiful in the face of the dazzling speed at which the Algerian Revolution is evolving. The contrast is violent. To say the the least, between France, which has sent 41 pseudo-Algerian deputies to its parliament and the UN, in which the overwhelming majority of nation pronounces themselves in favor of the Algerian people's right to independence. The same glaring difference has appeared between General de Gaulle's judgment that the era of combat is over, and that of the said international organization, which deems the state of war in Algeria a threat to world peace. Landing on Maison Blanchy's airport, the French government's new delegates, Mr. Delverrier, declared to the Algerian colonialists, "Our flare-up on May 30th, your calm resolution on September 28th, the legislative elections held right throughout the country have given you this certainty. France is staying. Never have the words of the pre-council landing in Algiers had such an artificial and ridiculous assent. Just as these words were pronounced, the Algerian government signed a joint communique with a sovereign state for the first time. Moreover, when you know that this state happens to be the People's Republic of China, it becomes clear that between reality in Algeria and French policy, an enormous discrepancies has emerged. These discrepancies have continued to get larger. The no judicial function, no vague desires for pacification, no promise, and no threat will be able to eliminate it. The time has come for France to yield to reality instead of trying to circumvent it, to operate under the pressure of events that are hastening the changeover for which it has always refused to take any initiative. The French government is not going to be right in the face of the Algerian nation and the near unanimity of the world's other nations. The era of pacification is over and done with. Algeria has entered straight into the era of independence. We are not the slow wits of the Civil War. Rather, General de Gaulle is a slow wit of pacification. 18. African's countries and their solidarity. Solidarity. Combat. Solidarity. That's not solidarity. Solidarity. I think that's solidarity. I'm going to find out. Make sure I'm saying it right. As soon as I find my phone. Solidarity.
Solidarity.
I didn't say solidarity. It says solid and no T. There's no T. There's no T, okay? Come on. Maybe it's just another word for it. Who knows?
Solidary.
Solidary. Okay. All right. Extract from Frantz Fanon's talk at the All-African People's Conference of December 1958. This conference, which gives us the chance to meet present the concrete situation in which we are variously engaged, marks an important date in the struggle against colonial domination. In the course of our work, we must try to establish dynamic forms of combat able to thwart the maneuvering of an adversary that, let us be in no doubt, purely and simply does not want to pull out of Africa. The fundamental characteristics of the African movement of liberation is that it is immediately situated at all in the international level, where African lives bow down under the weight of foreigners, and the interests of imperialism cohere around the organic solidarity. Certainly, major contradictions exist among the colonial powers, but when exploiting them, one ought never to forget to keep it tactical without ever altering the strategy of liberating the continent. We must agree to seek out tactical alliances with colonial powers with opposed interests. In order to weaken them, we must exercise caution to ensure that these alliances do not dent our doctrinal position. Each African must understand himself to be engaged in the struggle to liberate the continent and must be very concretely able to respond physically to the call of this or the territory. Each African party must develop the African consciousness of its people. It is not possible, according to us, confronting as we are implacable imperialist designs, to pursue a policy to engage in a particular arrangement with colonialist forces. The national combat must not be separated from the African combat. Where this rift to set into the overall combat strategy, we would witness a redevelopment of colonial systems, a change of the physiognomy or the magic operation of camouflage, such that the imperialist mortgage would remain alive and kicking on African soil. National will in Africa today must be redoubled by the will to liberate Africa. All propaganda, all directives, all calls of the masses must contain a prominent reference to the struggle of Africa's liberation. And Algeria cannot be really Algeria if he does not feel in his innermost self the indescribably horrible drama that is unfolding in Rhodesia or in Angola. The Africans' anti-colonialism, even when already independent, cannot be reduced to staking out a moral position. Each African is an anti-colonial soldier, and we will know that in certain circumstances we do not have the choice of arms. The African anti-colonialism is a combatant anti-colonialism and not a realm of ethnic awareness. The Belgian, English, and French colonialists must get used to seeing each African as a unremitting enemy of their domination in Africa. In the struggle they have led against any army of close to 1 million soldiers for more than 4 years, the Algerians have strengthened at once his national consciousness and the African dimensions of his existence. The entire African colonial edifice feels in its innermost essence the repercussions of the Algerian War. The French policy innovation elsewhere in Africa will emerge under the sway of this war. More precisely, the Reform Act and the recent communities of state were proposed at determinate moments of persistence concerning the opening of the possible armed front in the territories under French domination. The Algerian people are struggling to liberate Africa and are contributing with other peoples to chasing colonialism from the continent. Africa is at war against colonialism, and it is impatient. African countries must commit to the path of association in combat, since the enemy is powerful, strong, and its room to maneuver remains considerable. African countries must unite, since imperialism its part is consolidating its position, discovering new faces, new forms of longevity. 19. Richard Wright, White Man's Listen. El Mujahideen, number 34, 3rd of August, 1959. If we can point out a sterile approach, that it is one that consists for an oppressed person to try to speak to the heart of his oppressor. History contains no examples of a dominant power yielding to the tongue's lashing, however reasonable and moving, of those that it crushes against material interests, sentiments, and good sense are never heard. It is hard to see why the black writer Richard Wright felt urged to solicit the understanding of the white man, even less so as his essay contributes to new elements and repeats without getting vigor that others have already said. White Men Listen, Doubleday and Company, 1957, is indeed presented as a sort of commentary on relations between whites and men of color. In the world today, our Wright proposes an example to the European, the mentality of and the feeling, the behavior of the black man, and to show him that his behavior is direct consequences of the white man's way of being and doing. The point then is to sort a portrait of the colonized. Wright's study thus suffers the same shortcomings of Mimimi's essays, the black man, like the Arab person, is grasped in his generality. He is an abstract figure, but in contrast to Mimi's, who strives to analyze in depth the psychological mechanisms of the colonized and dismantle them in the meticulousness, the rigor of the clockmaker. Wright is satisfied with citing the main components of the black man, of whom he provides a global and consequently superficial view. Thus, hold on, I gotta finish. Thus, in the first chapter, which is devoted to the psychological reactions to the oppressed peoples, we find a rapid confusion, enumeration of the most common attitude of black towards the white. For example, Wright observes that black people always feel and react with reference to whites that they take up on their own behalf by internalizing it, their purported inferiority, that they are distrustful of whites, and being distrustful, they tend to play a role in front of them, that in order to compensate their current misfortunes, they seek refuge in the invocation of the past, that liberated, they continue to define themselves with reference to their former masters. Rather, they fear a new sort of slavery. Rather, they give themselves over to the religion of industrialization, to the cult of sacrifice, to the mystique of figures, in order to accomplish their economic dependencies as fast as possible and liberate themselves from the colonial yoke. These remarks in the generality are not false, of course, but precisely their generality. So to say nothing of their banality prevents them from being forceful. They appear abstract without direct relations to the concrete. Wright does happen to give examples and cites cases, but black people, that he stages an entire chapter concerning black American poets. All belong to the smaller number of the westernized, and this further restricts the scope of his book. The black man that Wright shows to the white man is not the black man that he speaks to him about. Now, since he wants to denounce the misery of the African masses, their radical alienations in all domains by means of colonialism, and since he intends to sensitize the European to their absolute destitution, it is perforce from their everyday down to earth lives. That example should have been sought. If he does not know his life, then why did he not give figures in infant mortality, malnourishment, salaries, which are more convincing, more significant than a poem? It is true that black writers and poets all endure their own suffering, that the drama of consciousness and of westernized black people, torn between his white culture and his negritude, can be very painful. But this drama, which after all kills no one, is too particular to be representative. The misfortune of the colonized African masses, exploited, subjugate, is first of the vital material order. Spiritual rift of the elite are a luxury that they are unable to afford. How is it possible to put an end to this exploitation, to give back to the peoples of Africa the initiative of their history, and by which means revolutionary war, progressive emancipation, which is indeed the main question? But here, again, our Wright misses the point, loses himself in chatter of the interest only to the elites. His rights, for example, our common problem of whites and black people is not radical, not political, not religious, not wholly economic, and not essentially political. So what is it? Metaphysical? Our Wright replies, the problem is freedom. Excellent find. But what freedom? He does not say. And how are we to acquire this freedom? By acting, by struggling? No, by waiting. The West, in order to keep their Western free and somewhat rational, must be prepared to accord the elites its freedom. The West must perform an act of faith and do this. Or man who boasts in his inherent to secularism and rationality. This piece of advice is rather surprising, but he is clear. Men of Europe, give the tools to that elite, them again, and let them finish the job. As a result, the questioning of white men, of his method, of his presence in Africa as an occupier and as an exploiter, comes to a saddened end. If we must perforce have trusted him, then he is not quite so malicious. Yeah. Lastly, this postulates, subtends our rights, calls for motivates his approach, an irrational, unjustified confidence in the West perspicaciously. Oh, I gotta look at this word. Hey, it's late. It's been staying at 5. That's cool. PERICACY.
Perspicacity.
Excuse me. Perspicacity, an ability to understand things quickly, discerning truth, and making good judgment. Perspicacity. It's generosity. Has history thus taught Richard Wright nothing? We might be permitted to think so. So basically, he's just being an idealist and not putting his things in concrete formation, and instead like asking for the tools for their own revolution to be successful. The conquering, he declares, global peace goes via national independence. Mujahideen, El Mujahideen, number 63, 25th of April, 1960. The Algerian National Liberation Front, cognizant of the impact of the struggle of combatants for the total elimination of the forces of domination and exploitation, cognizant of the contribution that it is making to the liberation of our continent, states that it will tirelessly pursue its liberating combat for independence, the Algerian national sovereignty. And indeed, regain Algerian national sovereignty will not be merely an Algerian victory, but an African victory, an Asian triumph, a set towards establishing a free and happy people. French colonialism caught in the stronghold of our common will is being led at an accelerated tempo to engage in rearguard combat, all doomed to failure. In this way, by establishing republics with no substance and granting nominal independence to countries in the south of the Sahara, French colonialism hopes to strengthen itself in the north, precisely in Algeria, which is presented as a bridgehead of imperialism on the African continent. But this pseudo-strategic withdrawal is in actual fact only the beginning of the process of imperialism, disintegration. To defeat colonialism in Algeria is at once to permit and ensure the triumph of Algerian national sovereignty, and to remove all imperialism. Hope to return with force in Africa. Also, each rent in the ranks of French colonialism has repercussions within the imperialist forces. The Algerian Revolution, because it consecrates and blossoming of the Algerian citizens, because it encounters the enthusiastic support of world opinions, is a force to be reckoned with. The Algerian government proposes to the French government that they find a solution together so that no more blood is spilt. The French government has replied that it must first crush the Algerian revolutionary forces. We maintain that the military victory is not foreseeable for the French army. The valiant National Liberation Army, continues to reinforce its military potential, and at the same time, revolutionary organizations are establishing the authority of the Algerian state over the entire national territory. That is more with constant support from the people, which is more united and resolute than ever. The French government uses the existence of European minority as a pretext to rule out any solutions likely to end the conflict ravaging Algeria. In this declaration, 22nd of April, 1960, President Farhat Abbas solemnly reinstated that the will of the Algerian people to give democratic freedom to all, and in lofty terms urged the Europeans of Algeria to take up a place within the country and build with us a social democratic Algerian republic. At a time when Danti is making palpable progress in the world, when having recourse to force is being increasingly condemned, the French government has decided to intensify the war in Algeria, and General de Gaulle has promised the French army future battlefields. This is why, on the eve of the important League summit, when Algerians remain steadfast by stating the international defense and security in the world, free force requires national independence, the effective recognition of people right to self-determination, and the elimination of regimes of oppression. The war in Algeria and the nuclear test in the Sahara are part of a precise policy to intimidate peoples and sabotage peace. The end of the war in Algeria is an imperious necessity if the work of securing peace in the world is seriously to be achieved. Stating why we are confident on the strictly military level remains pointless. We simply insist that our strategy is on schedule and that the French government's about turn does not surprise us. Let us add that it is difficult for us to accept that a state might remain neutral towards the war of Algeria. The just combat that we have been pursuing must, in our view, compel the support of all goodwill men. Some try to exercise their negative neutralism by mentioning the existence of treaties with France. We think, for our part, that such treaties ought to arouse the suspicion and mistrust of those who combat for the right of man, for the right of people to self-determination, for freedom and dignity. We are not saying that those who are not with us are against us, but we are saying that those who are not with us are not with us, and the Algerian people, counting its friends, has been powerfully encouraged by their steadfastness and by the depths of their ranks. 21. African Access of the West. Al-Mujahideen, number 78, 23rd of February, 1961. Patrice Lumumba was born in Katako, Komba, in Kassa, on 2nd July 1952. His father and mother were small farmers belonging to the Batilia ethnic group, which almost single-handedly kept up the struggle against the Belgian invaders for nearly 20 years. At the age of 6, Patrice's parents enrolled him in a Catholic missionary school. 2 years later, he revolted against the priest's teachings. It was then, he said, that the injustice of the preachers, who were in fact our absolute masters, revealed itself to him. He quit the missions school. My father, he recounted, was superstitious. He feared the God of the whites. Patrice was forced out of the paternal home, despite his mother's supplication. Simplification. Yeah. His maternal uncle, who was later to become General Ladula, secretly helped him. Also feared the reprisal of the good fathers. Patrice eventually had a more liberal education at the Protestant mission, but he would remember his first school experience all his life. In 1943, he was employed as a traveling salesman when he became a postal clerk in Stanleyville. He was part of the so-called Circle of the Involved, a cultural association that admitted only educated and employed Congolese into it. He quickly became the president of this circle, in which ideas of emancipation and liberation were fiercely discussed by those who would later become officials in the Stanleyville government. In 1954, Patrice Lumumba again came into conflict with all-powerful missionaries over the secularization of education. In 1956, Lumumba was sentenced to 2 years in prison for alleged embezzlement. At the time, missionaries really unleashed against those who treated their empire and who threatened their empire. In 1958, Patrice Lumumba immigrated upon leaving prisons in Leopoldville, where he got a job at the Polar Barisi as an accountant. Very soon he was to become the company deputy sales manager. That same year, he went to the Brussels World Fair, where he came face to face with Congolese youth, aware of the state of their country. Upon his return to Leopoldville on 10th October, he founded the Congolese National Movement with Dorenio Ilu, I can't say his name, who was to betray him, and N. Govilio, the MNC's program, democratization of the institutes belonging to the Congolese, unity and independence. Lumumba attended the first All-African Peoples Conference held in Accra in December. He himself said that it was then he became definitively aware of the solidarity of African peoples. On January 1958, the Belgian police stirred up trouble in Leopoldville in a bid to decapitate the independence movement, and the repression was bloody. Several hundreds were shot. Lumumba ramped up the number of meetings, the mass gatherings. He was aware the Belgian government representatives were perturbed. They were going to do a job on him, fully aware that his party would stop being dangerous without him. On the 17th July 1959, Ailio, in the service of the Société Générale, and Kelalangida, one of Lumumba's assassins, in the service of the Union Miniere, created a split, given that Lumumba could not be excluded from his own party. Failing to neutralize Patrice Lumumba, his enemies, helped by the colonial police, fomented riots at the meeting of Stanleyville on 30th October 1959. As the MNC leader was due to give a speech there, dozens of Congolese militants met their deaths during the riots. Patrice Lumumba was imprisoned in Stanleyville, then transferred in December to Kantanga's prison of despair, built in Jodatville by the Union Miniere. In January 1960, despite all his enemies maneuvering, the colonial authorities were forced to liberate him. He went directly to Brussels, where he participated in the Congolese Round Table Conference. There, he defended the principles of immediate and unconditional independence against the Kazavambu, who, upon the council of the French ministry, Cove de Murrayville, dreamed only to unite the province of Leopoldville with the so-called ex-French Congo, and against Thombi's, spokesperson of the Union Miniere, who merely read the notes that his Belgian advisors had written up for him, and who proposed that Belgium have permanent control over the Congo's finances and foreign affairs. Patrice Lumumba succeeded in wresting the independence for the date of 30th June 1960. In May of the same year, the MNC and its allies won a crushing victory at the general elections, 80% in Cove, 70% in Kassa, 55% in the province of Leopoldville and Katanga. The administration succeeded to install its own creatures, Thombi's Mambongo, even though they got only 20% of the actual vote. Despite this victory, Kazavumbu in Tonzambu, Eleo, Kaladanji, all the mercenaries of the colonization did their utmost to remove Lumumba from power after the people had put him there. He was to succeed in imposing the people's law and making it triumph. Now Prime Minister on 30th June 1960, Lumumba, he received the Belgian king as a guest of the first government of the Congolese Republic. He reminded his guests of the Congolese martyrdom throughout 80 years of colonialism, but emphasized that he was ready to cooperate on an equal footing with Belgium. But Belgium was not to stop plotting and scheming against the Congo sovereignty. In July, riots were fomented in two Belgian companies, and again amongst the ranks of the forces of law, and ordered riots that supervised and commanded by Belgian officers gave the government in Brussels a pretext to intervene militarily and speed up the plotting it had hatched, namely Katanga's succession under the traitor Thumbi, then also Kaza under Kalaladanji. I can't say the names right, sorry, but I'm trying. Look, I have to make sure I'm a human now. Confronted with the Belgian intervention on July 13th, Lubumba and Kazavu appealed to the United Nations for aid in a jointly signed message. They stipulated, it is possible that we may be forced to ask for the Soviet Union's intervention if the Western camps does not put an end to the aggression being penetrated against the sovereignty of the Republic of the Congo. But the West responded by condemning Patrice Lumumba. On September 5th, Kasavubu in Calcuts with Thambus and Kalalandanji, can't say his name right, and acting on the councils of his Belgian and French friends, illegally pronounced the disposition of Patrice Lumumba's government. Some days later, Joseph Mobutu, and Belgian police informer, and now a colonel, carried out a military coup. For more than a week, the lives of Patrice Lumumba and his collaborators were seriously threatened by killers in the service of the colonialists and their lackeys. Patrice Lumumba alone stood up to his raging enemies. His collaborators were tracked down. His African friends threatened with being handed over to French colonialists. In December, Patrice Lumumba escaped from Leopoldville with some of his reliable friends. In Casa, he was informed that his wife and eldest and youngest son of 3 of age, Roland, had been put in prison by Kalangia and Mobutu mercenaries. He was already certain of safely reaching Stanleyville, where Mr. Gonzaga, the vice prime minister of the legal government, was awaiting him. He tried to wrest his wife and son from the claws of the killers and decided to return home to free them. He was then taken prisoners at Leopoldville and transferred to Thieville, where he succeeded in transmitting his revolutionary faith into his own watchmen. But in Elizabethville, new plots were being hatched. European adventurers offered their services to Tambo, who trembled in the knowledge that Lumumba was alive and was pressed by his Western employers to do away with him and reconquer the Congo once and for all. Professional killers such as the paratroopers, war criminals, the tranquilers, advised the assassination of the hero of independence as a way to provoke reprisal in the Eastern Province, reprisal that would be massively exploited for the destruction of Stanleyville, Bukavu, and Manono. Fully aware of the intended plan, Kazabu and Mobutu handed over their prisoners for the sum of 56 million francs. The date of 8th February 1961 had been decided for the assassination of Patrice Lumumba and his 2 companions. On the 11th, the assassins confessed to their crimes. Patrice Lumumba died knowing that his sacrifice would contribute to his people's victory. May he live forever in the hearts of fighters for a free Africa. Patrice Lumumba's odious assassination. If I am assassinated, said Patrice Lumumba to his close friends, I would not been by the authentic African, but by the Westerners. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. He fell as a mujahideen for freedom, the freedom that he would also say it is not up for discussion. Patrice Lumumba died because he refused all compromise with the enemies of freedom, with the traitors who even went to him in prisons in Thieville to offer him the most ignoble deal, betrayal or death. he chose sacrifice as a militant. We will fight for a free Africa until the last drop of blood. Africa today accuses the West of assassinating Patrice Lumumba, Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo. Africa accuses the West's mercenaries, Kalaganjo, Manogo, and Mabundu, Del Ndela, Kandalo, Thambu, and Kazavumbu, I can't say these guys, henchmen of the Congolese people. On 10th October 1960, whilst Lumumba stood up to the pack of his enemies along the Société Générale newspaper, Le Courrier d'Afrique published this 5-column wide title, Lumumba is the assassin we must condemn, by Albert Kalajuda, I can't say his name, a man in the pay of the Union Ministry, against the man who refused to accept his people's misery and the exorbitant privileges and pillaging of colonial societies. But Kalaju, who would go even further in his speech, so cheerily publishing by the Belgium newspaper, the Leopoldville, he added that it is necessary to judge and to execute. Africa accused Felbert Yule, I can't say his name, of the complicity in the assassination. On February 8th, the abbot of the Franco-African community was in Elizabethville with his friends Tommy and Manongo. At the end of July, Fulbert Yayulio received the emissary of these same figures in Brazzaville. Figures then tasked with contacting Kasavu men in order to liquidate Patrice Lumumba and his friends. A certain Delarue reside over these meetings along with Kasavu, I can't say their name, sorry everybody, close advisor to the Belgian La Haloui. These two partners in crime have very close ties to policemen, Dides, and to the leaders of the Algerian Ultras. Jacques Telas, I can't say these people's names, sorry everybody, himself a creature of the Penchi Trust, which is interested in the Ingra Dam in the Congo and incidentally subsidized the entertainment expenses of the Bankongo autonomists, the head of whom is precisely Joseph Kasavu. I can't say these people's names, I'm so sorry everybody, who welcomed the council from Selowateli, head of cabinet, Exodux, representative in the Congo and Union advisor of Leopoldville. Africa accuses the creature of the Union Ministry of Belgium, Monago and Tumzi, I can't say these people's names, sorry everybody, this Godfrey Manago, Thumzi's right arm, man called the strong man of Katanga, declared to the Western journalists in July, in August, and in September, "It's my skin for Lumumba's. I will not miss him. A line is missing here." By claiming his hatred of Patrice Lumumba, I know, he said, my feelings towards him. In August, this same Godfro Manago threatened to fire at the plane at Ralph Banchi, who represents the UN Security General Secretary, and he held a woman and children in Katanga's landing strip under the threat of machine guns for fear of seeing the UN return. Hold on a second. My reading skills are starting to go down. Okay, good, we're done. Africa accuses the great imperialist societies and, in the first place, the Copper Trusts of commitment on a crime against the Congolese people, and with the assassinating its liberator, the main stakeholder of the UN ministry before independence was the colonies administration represented by the CSK, the Special Committee of Katanga, possessing 2/3 of the shares of the powerful mining society. It had been invested that the Congolese state should supersede the Belgian administration when it was created, resulting in a great loss of influence of Western financial groups in the Congo. From January 1960s on, two men were to strive to dispossess the future Congolese state. Gashov, a minister of the African Affairs, the counterpart to Lakos, the Shavriri, can't say his name, charge of economic affairs. The former is the father of the president of the American Euro-African Development Corporation. The latter is himself the minister of the campaign ministry of the Katanga Electricity Company. These two great friends of the Congolese subsoil managed to dissolve the CSK 3 days before independence on the 22nd June 1960s. The point being to deprive the young republic of its main revenues, to doom it to economic dependency. However, Patrice Lumumba managed to feat the feat of resting in industries. 22.5% of the shares of Union Ministries de Hati Katanga, mining union of Upper Katanga. But the error was made. It was not specified if these shares should return to Central Congolese state or to the provincial Katangese government. Everything was done to prevent the central government from having any control over the activities of the trusts in the Congo. On 2nd March 1960, the reigning Sosotweli of Northern Rhodesia, Sir Boy Weleski, declared some Katangese Malus contacts me to suggest extending Katanga a friendly hand after the independence. The negotiation between Belgian financiers and the Angola American group of Rhodesia multiplied. The Foreign Affairs Committee of American Senate agreed that owing to the Congo's contribution to the industrial and military need of the United States, it is essential that our future relations with this country secure its continued supplies. What are these supplies? Uranium from Sankoloba and South Kaza and Katanga's copper. The operation was to be carried out to march of the beating drum, the Union Minery, and the Union per la Colonization. Wow. Founded members of Kanakat. Can't say these names, everybody, I'm so sorry. Brought Maso Thumb to power in the province, although he represented less than a quarter of the Katanganese population, 3/4 of which, 1 million inhabitants, were represented by a cartel ally to Patrice Lumumba, the Inkasa, where Lumumba himself got 80% of the votes. Kalajon, who was urged to begin secession. A crisis ensued. War against the Congolese people, war against Africa. Africa accused the United States of this plot. Africa accused the UN Secretariat of having covered up this undertaking of economic recapture and of compromising the credibility of the United Nations. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated because he refused to see his country exist as a mere appendix of an imperialist economic and mining trust. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated because he wanted to see his country freed from the destitution and servitude enforced by the imperialist monopolies. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated because he wanted to defend the unity of his country, and because when alive, and even when chained up, tortured and humiliated, he represented the will of the Congolese people to free itself. If I am assassinated, it will not be by an authentic African, but by a Westerner. Patrice Lumumba himself denounced his murderers even before they revealed themselves by their ignorance of Africa. They forgot that by announcing the disappearance of Lumumba without daring to reveal the actual circumstances of his assassination or the place of his inhumation, they proclaimed that Lumumba has been defeated. For the Congolese people, Patrice Lumumba will forever be a legendary hero of a victorious Congo. Tomorrow, popular fervor will indicate the presence of Patrice Lumumba, wherever the militants of freedom undertake to fight against the imperialist hordes. We will simultaneous in Kaiv, in Kassa, in Katanga, in Stanleysville, in Leopoldville. Patrice Lumumba will have been completely right. He recalled through his supreme sacrifice that there can be no compromise with the enemies of freedom. I think since I'm like kind of deteriorating on the reading, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop on page 640. My reading is starting to bleh. I don't want to like keep fucking up. Add a bookmark. It's good to know more about Patrice Lumumba. That was great. I like that. Don't talk about him a lot. Don't know a lot about him. Just know that he was a legend for the Congolese people. So that was good. So 640. Yeah, 640. I'm sorry. I just like my reading's deteriorating a bit, and I still have another reading to go to. So it's not a big deal, is it? I hope it's not a big deal. So tomorrow we'll start the we use violence 1. All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close out. Have a good night.